Um, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal people, and any other people with connections to this country. I want to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and the historic and ongoing contributions to the community sector that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people make. I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'll now pass over to Lara so she can do the info session.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Apologies for the hiccup earlier, team. I just want to check with you, Leanne. Do we have time to go to about 12:05? Is that possible?
Yeah, anyone that needs to leave earlier can just hop off. So
Of course, absolutely. Thank you. All right, we'll get started. Thank you for doing a wonderful acknowledgement. We would like to also acknowledge the Ngunnawal community and any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name's Lara, as I said. I work with the education team here at the ACT Legislative Assembly. It's going to be a bit of an interactive session at points today, so I know that it's being recorded. If you don't wish to, the chat is completely fine, but if you do feel comfortable, just unmute at any point and ask, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that come up, and if not, happy to get back to you. Just as a note, Leanne, I did some updates to the slides, so I'll send them to you right after the session. I was just tweaking them this morning just to make sure that they were a bit better. So today's session, we're going to be covering a few things. We're going to be looking at an overview of the Assembly. We'll have a look at the legislative process. We'll then focus on community sector involvement, which is probably the more relevant part to a lot of the work that you all do. So we're going to be primarily looking at petitions and committees. And then there's a formal section for Q&A, but really at any point, please just ask. It's a pretty casual session. Happy to talk at any point during the program. Now, with a quick reaction, a thumbs up or a smiley face or whatever you would like to use, can I get a show of virtual hands or emojis of people that are new to the ACT, so have not lived here their whole life? We've got a couple of people. I've got a few more. Sometimes it takes a little while to come through. Excellent. So we've got a few people that have been here for a while and a few new-ish people. Welcome. So a little brief bit of history. The Legislative Assembly is the youngest parliament in the ACT. The ACT was carved out of New South Wales in 1911, and it was originally called the Federal Capital Territory. Before 1989, it was actually looked after by the federal government. So all the decisions that were made were looked after for us by the federal system. There was a survey sent out to the people of the ACT in 1978 asking if we would like self-government, and over 2/3 said no, we're quite happy with how it is at the moment, would like to keep it. 10 years later, the federal government said there's enough people living here now, you're going to have self-government. So they passed the Self-Government Act. So the act that sets up the ACT is a federal act of government. This brought about some really interesting political parties. So there was an anti-self-government party. There was actually a couple of different ones. There was the Party. There was the Sunrise Tomato Party. So the first election that we had quite a few interesting nominations. Two of the anti-self-government parties actually were elected, and one of those members actually became the first speaker. So there was quite a big sentiment. It was interesting to see that there were people against the place they're working in elected in to basically remove it, which is quite a little interesting part of the ACT history. Now, fast forwarding to today, this is what the ACT looks like. So we've got 5 electorates in the ACT. They're divided up by population. So each part of the ACT is roughly the same number of voters. So you've got up the north here, Yerrabee, which is about, I think, oh gosh, there's about 90,000 people. I'm not quite certain on the amount of voters, but Yerrabee's, Gungahlin, Ngunnawal, that area. Ginninderra, Belconnen, you've got Currajong in the north, which is where the Assembly is, Murrumbidgee's, Western Woden, and then Brindabella. And each of these electorates are multi-member electorates. So each electorate has 5 members representing it. We have elections every 4 years here in the ACT. Anyone remember when the last election was? Hopefully, I'll get you just pop that in the chat. We'll use the chat a little bit today for some of the interactive parts of the session. So anyone know? You don't have to have an exact date, but roughly. Oh my gosh! Oh, very close. It was between both of these dates. It was October in 2024, but we had our first meeting in the Assembly in November. So, but yeah, last year was our most recent election. As a result of that, here are the members that we've got in the 11th Assembly, which is the current term that we're in. We've got 3 different political parties and a couple of independents. So we've got 10 people from the Labor Party, 9 from the Liberal Party, 4 from the Greens, and 2 independents. Now, the ACT Legislative Assembly is currently operating under a minority government setup, which is very common for the ACT. We've had one majority government in the history of the ACT self-government, and that was in 2004, was right after the big bushfires in 2003. But typically we operate under minority governments. So with 10 Labor, 9 Liberal, the crossbench have provided their support for Labor to form government. What they're doing different this term is that the Greens, who had formed government with the Labor Party previously, have not formally made that agreement this time. What they've said is that they will support things like supply bills, so certain budget bills passing the Assembly for the ACT, but they'll consider everything else that comes up separately, which also means now we don't necessarily have, we do not have Greens members in the ministry. We don't have formal agreements about what they'll do and things like that, which we had in the previous Assembly. Again, if there are any questions at any point, please just pop them in the chat if you would like. I've got it open up in a little window, so I'll keep checking checking throughout the program. There are a few terms I would love for us to just get our heads around. I know that they do get used sometimes interchangeably, but they are quite different. So those 3 terms that I wanted to chat about are Parliament, Government, and Executive. When we talk about the Parliament, we're talking about all 25 members. We're talking about the full Legislative Assembly. So laws get made by the Assembly, they don't get made by the government. The government can introduce and perhaps put forward a lot of what they want and what they have on their government agenda. But a government, so the 10 members that we have today in the current Assembly, cannot pass a bill. So the Assembly, the Parliament, those 2 terms are interchangeable. That is all 25 members. We then zoom into government. We're looking at the party or parties with support of majority or the majority. In this case, they don't have a majority, but they've got the support of the majority. They've got enough people there to support them to pass those really important bills. If we zoom in a little bit further and we look at executive, what we're talking about is the ministry. So the ACT executive refers to the chief minister and their ministers. There is a limit on how many ministers the ACT can have, and that is 9. In the current Assembly, we have 8. So there are 10 Labor members, 8 of them are ministers. The 2 which are not ministers are the 2 newest members. So we've got over here, Miss Tuff and Mr. Werner Gibbings. They're the most recent members. So executive is the ministry, the government is the team in power, and the Assembly is all 25 members. Into that, this all feeds into the separation of powers, which is based on the Westminster system, so what we get from the British Parliament. It basically means that the powers of government are split across different branches, and it helps to keep those in power accountable. The first branch we have is the Legislative Assembly. That's the same term as Parliament. Again, it's all 25 members. Their job is to make laws. One of their main jobs is to make laws. The second is the executive. This makes up the chief minister and the ministers, and people working in the ACT public service support the ACT executive in governing the territory. So they enact the laws that have been passed by the Assembly. Now, I wanted to just quickly pause here and kind of just make a point of difference. So I work for the ACT Legislative Assembly. I do not work for any public service that supports the executive. We are a statutory body that has been set up by law. And our job is to serve all members of parliament, to be bipartisan, impartial in our dealings and the way that we communicate, because we serve all members. We fit under a group called a public sector member. Other people or other areas that fall under that are things like the like Elections ACT, who run elections and look at where the electorate borders are. You've got things like the Integrity Commission, the Ombudsman, the Auditor General, all these really important roles that work to keep government accountable, help to keep the assembly running, help to keep everyone kind of working together, but are at kind of arm's length from the government. So it's really important that we're all independent. We then have our final branch of the separation of powers, which is the judiciary. So the courts and tribunals that basically have the power to interpret and make judgments on laws. We obviously won't go into too much detail about that today. As part of our system of government and how we operate, there's a really important principle called responsible government, which basically means that the assembly, so all 25 members, have the power to elect and remove governments. So it's a really important foundation of parliamentary democracy. We are the only jurisdiction in the whole country that actually elects the head of government. So what you typically see at federal elections or at states and territory levels is the political party that wins the election, the leader of that party will typically become the Prime Minister if it's a federal election, or the Premier if it's a state. In the ACT, once we have an election, all the members come into the chamber, they have their first meeting, and then they vote on who they want to be the leader. So theoretically, it would be incredibly unlikely, I don't see it happening, but you could have, if a Labor government is in office, you could have a Liberal chief minister because it's a vote of the Assembly. But that would be incredibly unlikely. If the Assembly puts forth a motion of no confidence and there's a majority vote, that can force a minister or the chief minister to resign. So yes, the government has the support of the majority and their job is to kind of put through a lot of their agenda, but they're still responsible to the Assembly, and they can decide whether, if they're happy with it, if they're not, with the majority vote, to change how that operates. Were there any questions? No, I heard some sound. Sorry, I thought there was a question, but it might have just been a microphone. It's all good. In terms of roles of the Assembly, we like to categorise it into 3 areas. So we've got here, the first one is legislation. So one of the primary roles is to consider and pass laws, change them or repeal them. There are 3 types of laws that we make here. So we've got government bills. So a bill is basically a draft law that's being introduced and discussed. Once it passes, it's called a law. But government bills, so introduced by ministers, by that executive group within the government. There are private member bills. They are from, so a private member is anyone who is not in the executive. So there are 2 Labor members who are private members, or the Liberal Party, the 2 Independents and the Greens. They are all private members. So any of them can introduce a bill. And then there's delegated legislation, such as regulations, road rules, parking fines, things like that. The second role of the Assembly is accountability. So as part of the responsible government, it's important that members who aren't ministers keep the government accountable. There's a few different ways this happens. So this can be questions without notice. So most of you would have seen Question Time, where anyone who's not a minister will ask a minister a question about actions that are being made, decisions, money that's being spent, things like that. There's also written questions that can be asked. There are motions, so voting on a question or idea saying we want the government to act in this way. There's also things like committees that keep the government accountable. There are a whole bunch of other ways as well, but these are the primary ways that the Assembly holds the government to account. And the last, probably the most important role, is representation. So the Assembly's job is to represent its electors. They need to be accessible to all their constituents. So on our website, we have all their email addresses, their phone numbers. A lot of them have their social media listed as well, so you can contact any of them through their different contact methods. But it's a really important part of the Assembly as they are elected members to represent the community. And another way the Assembly kind of supports these roles is by inquiring into different issues through things like committees or representing or members sponsoring petitions, which we'll look at a little bit later. Any questions at this point? We're going to head into how laws get made. This is a bit of an interactive part of the session, but are there any questions at this point? Okay. All right, we'll go into the passage of a bill. When laws get made in the ACT, there's about 7 steps to making a law here. I've got them not in order. And what I thought we would do is we would play a bit of a guessing game. So I'm going to get you to use your chat so I can get everyone to get ready and write down the letter corresponding to the step they think is the first step in making a law for the ACT. So we've got 7 options. Again, these are not in order. So there's inquiry and scrutiny, which is A. You've got agreement in principle, agreement, drafting, presentation, detail stage, and notification. So if you think inquiry and scrutiny is the first one, type in A. If you think it's agreement in principle, B, etc. So I'm going to get you now to type in which one you think is the first one. And this one's a really tricky one. It goes almost always one of 2 ways. I don't expect you to know what it is. But when we run this with students, it tends to be a bit easier because they have less knowledge of what words can mean in different contexts. It's a lot harder for adults. And I can see exactly kind of where people are thinking with this. So we've got GE, we kind of almost got all the all the options there. I think we do have a correct answer, I think. Alrighty, okay. So the correct answer for this one is actually D, which is drafting. So well done. A couple of you got that one. A lot of time people will guess G, which is notification, because you want to notify the Assembly, but notification takes on a very different meaning when we talk about legislation in the ACT. So the first thing that happens outside the Assembly. So a bill gets drafted. That will happen by the fabulous team at the Parliamentary Council's office, the PCO. They support all members from the executive, private members, etc. And they'll kind of go back and forth working on the wording, making sure that it conveys what the member wants it to. And then once it's ready, it'll go to the next stage. Where do you think where do you think ideas for bills come from? I'm going to get you again to use the chat. Don't have to write an essay, you can write a word, a couple of words. But where do you think these ideas for bills come from? So I know I keep looking down. My camera is set up in front of me, but my chat is below. So it's anyway, I can have a look and see. Everywhere, very yes. Public feedback. We've got members of the public advocacy group, community, fantastic lobbyists. Yep. Consultation. Yeah, all of these are absolutely part of it. We've also got government initiatives, campaign promises, a bunch of other things as well. But departments, yeah, election commitments, fantastic. So ideas for bills can come from a lot of different areas. Okay, so our first step was drafting, which was D. All right, step 2, and you got the hang of it now. So what do we think is the next step to making a law? I'm also going based off a honesty system. I'm assuming that no one's looking it up while we're running this activity, and it's we're just guessing. There unfortunately are no prizes except for knowing that you did a good job. Alrighty, so drafting. What do we think next? A, B, C, E, F, or G? What do we reckon, team? Oh, this one's quite mixed as well. Tell you what, when it gets about halfway, I think we end up getting a lot of answers. Okay, so we've got a lot of E's and a lot of F's. All right, let's have a look. It is presentation, which was, I believe, E. Well done. So the second stage is the first one that happens within the Assembly. So the bill is formally given to the Assembly for members to consider. The presenting member will get up, give a speech, and then they'll pause. Once they finish their speech, they'll have an adjournment after the speech. I'm going to get some of you to write down, why do you think after the bill is presented, why would the Assembly have an adjournment at this point? I want to know what you think. And while you're writing that, we'll have a bit of a chat about what it gets presented a bit with. So they also present the written plain English statement, as well as about whether the bill complies with Human Rights Act, which is the ACT, the Territories Human Rights Act. So yeah, why do we have an adjournment at this point? Why do members pause after having that? Yep, to consider the content, to talk, absolutely. Allowing people to consider it. When does community consultation happen? Great question, Sarah. We are going to talk about that. There's a couple of points. One can happen before the bill gets introduced, so while they're drafting. The second point, I don't want to talk about because it might give you the answer to one of the next steps. So we will talk about that, I promise. But yeah, basically we want to allow people to discuss it. Often at this point, it's only the people that have presented it that might have seen it. So we want to make sure that all members have a chance to do some research and chat about that. So there might be some community consultation at this point. There might be some at the start. And there's one more point which we'll get to. Okay, third step, A, B, C, F, or G. So we've had drafting, we've then had presentation. What is our next step after drafting, presentation? A, B, C, F, G. And we've got quite a few things there. A lot of A's, few B's, G and F snuck in as well. ZB, that's a new one. So it's definitely A. We've got quite a lot of people guessing that. It is inquiry and scrutiny. This is the other point of community consultations. I think, Sarah, you asked that question just earlier. Standing orders, which are the rules of the Assembly, basically state that any bill that gets presented has to be sent to two committees. The first one is the Scrutiny Committee, which looks at its compliance to the Human Rights Act. It doesn't look at the content of the bill. It also makes sure that it's well written. If it doesn't feel it complies with the Human Rights Act, it can ask for further explanation or justification as to why this bill doesn't need to, or why it's important that it pass regardless. The second committee gets sent to is the topic committee. So if it was the subject specific committee, so if it was a bill on education, it would go to the education committee. This is another point where community consultation can happen. So if the committee decides to undertake an inquiry, they will go out and seek submissions. And I'm aware that ACCOS are quite active in this space. So I know that you will provide a lot of submissions to various committee inquiries. So this is another point where you can get involved. I will say a lot of times with bills that pass, a lot of them are just really basic amendments. They don't often hold inquiries for bills that come through, but this is another point where that can happen. So drafting, presentation, inquiry, and scrutiny. What is our fourth step? So we've got A, C, F, and G here. What do we reckon? It's getting a bit easier. Hopefully we're narrowing it down a little bit. Oh, a lot of B's coming through. We've got an F. I'll give it a few more people the chance to write through, and then we'll have a look and see what we've got. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix. I think there's a bit more B's. We're tossing up between agreement and principle and detail. The next step is actually B, so it was agreement and principle. So this is where the first or sometimes the only debate occurs on the bill. It alternates between government, opposition, and crossbench. Members can give a speech of up to 15 minutes on this issue. So while the intention is to debate the idea in general, it's also a point for members to flag potential amendments they might want to make. The member who presented the bill will give the last speech. Then members will vote, and we need a majority to pass. If we get a majority in favour, it goes on to the next stage. If it doesn't, it fails, and it can be presented again, but just not within the same calendar year that it was in which it failed. All right, next step. So drafting, presentation, inquiry and scrutiny, agreement in principle. What is our next step? All right, people are pretty quick on this one. So we have a lot of people guessing F, which is absolutely correct. So our detail stage. This is an optional stage in the Assembly. Members of the Assembly can vote to basically get rid of this stage within certain bills. So they have the chance, if they want to discuss the bill in detail, which includes changing existing wording, taking out parts of it, or adding new parts. So members can debate each proposed change, and every proposed change has to be agreed on. They don't necessarily get voted on individually. Members might say amendments 1, 10, 12, 13, 14, 21, 22, whatever, yes or no. So they can vote on them in bulk, but the Assembly can choose to skip this detail stage if no one wants to make any changes. And this happens really, really often. Oh, how long does the whole process take? This is a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of question answer. Some bills can be passed really quickly when you're looking at things that require reactive change. That could be things like bills to do with bushfires or to do with COVID responses. That stuff can pass quite quickly. When you're looking at things like the Voluntary Assisted Dying Bill or the Crimes Act amendment about revenge porn, which we'll look at as our case, that stuff can take a bit longer. So it can be sometimes a few days, it can take a few weeks, it can take a few months, it can take a few years. So there's no kind of average time. I'm sorry, that's not an exact answer. It's kind of just the way that it works in practice. All right, second last one, agreement or notification. What do we think? Got a couple of people writing C. Great, they're coming through. Excellent. So there's more people writing C. You are all so far correct. It is C. It is the agreement stage. So this is the final vote. There's no debate here. All members vote on the bill, which might have some changes put into it, or it could have stayed the same from the start. Like all stages, it needs a majority to move to the final stage. And then we go to our final step, which of course is notification. So this is unique to the ACT. In pretty much every state and territory and at the federal level, we have royal assent on bills. So the Governor General, the representative of the King, will sign the bill giving it royal assent. And that's how it goes from bill to law. We don't have a Governor General in the ACT. So in some ways, we sort of operate like a mini republic. What will happen is the clerk, who is a parliamentary officer in the same way that I am, and the integrity ombudsman, all these kind of people are, they will look through the bill and make sure that it reflects everything that was discussed, any changes that were talked about have been included, removed, etc. The Speaker will then send a letter to the Parliamentary Council's office, so the PCO, our friends who drafted legislation, and they'll ask them to change the status online. So once a bill gets introduced, it gets put on something called the legislation register. And as it processes, the status will change. It'll also have the date of which it will be enacted. Some things will be enacted the next day, again, if it's quite a reactive thing or something that's quite small, but something like the euthanasia bill had an enactment date of a year later. So it just depends on what kind of legislation we're looking at. Now, if we look at an example which highlights this process, I thought it'd be helpful to talk about the Crimes Amendment Act 2017. It can be quite abstract to get the handle of these processes, so hopefully this will kind of give us a bit of an idea. So when we look at the drafting stage, in early 2017, there was some concern about revenge porn. So revenge porn, so sharing intimate images of partners without their consent. Opposition had drafted a bill, and they'd done that with community and stakeholder feedback. And there's a few changes that were incorporated before it was presented. It then got presented to the Assembly. It was introduced on the 7th of June in 2017. And in the presentation speech done by Mr. Hanson, he acknowledged that there was missing a section for one of the other members to add some solutions to. Another member moved for the adjournment, and then we went to our inquiry and scrutiny stage. So the scrutiny committee considered this bill. They actually went through the process on the 18th of July, and then they reported back to the Assembly. They highlighted some concerns with interference with rights to freedom of expression, and the introducing member was required to provide some information about that. We then, they didn't have a community inquiry. They had a flag by the scrutiny committee that it conflicted with the Human Rights Act. We then go to our agreement in principle stage. So 4 members spoke in favour of the bill. So if we go back, it was introduced in June. The inquiry scrutiny stage happened in July, and then in August was the first debate. So all the members had worked together outside the bill. It was passed unanimously at this point. We then did go to a detail stage. Minister Gentleman proposed 29 changes, which were all agreed to unanimously. And then the final vote, again, members agreed to adopt this as law. This process of agreement, principle agreement, started on the 16th of August down to notification, where the Speaker wrote to the PCO on the 29th of August. So that was within the same month, but a few months after it was introduced. And it became into effect the day after it was, the Speaker had notified the PCO of that. So that's kind of a rough recap of a process of an actual amendment to a bill that existed, where members are working together across different political party lines. And this is just one example of a timeline of how that can play out. Any questions at this point? We're going to get into the petitions committee section now, but are there any questions before we move on? All right, let's have a look at petitions. So apologies for the terrible memes. I thought it would be fun to put a picture of Shrek. This is apparently a real petition, obviously not something for us here, but I thought we'd start looking at petitions and then we'll look at committees. So let's have a chat about how they work, how to create one, how to sign one. So petitions are formal requests signed by many people to request change by the government. It's one of the oldest ways for us to interact, and indirect way that people can interact with Parliament. There are a few things that petitions require. So there are paper and electronic petitions, e-petitions, which we'll get into. But all petitions, the rules for them are set out in the standing orders. So the standing orders, I think, is from 89 to 100, but there's a section in standing orders called petitions. It's very easy to find, and it has every single requirement in order for a petition to be carried out correctly. So it's really important, if you are going to be involved with that, to be across those. Every petition needs to have a member sponsor it, who will then present the petition to the Assembly once it's finished receiving all the signatures. Closing dates are within 1 week to 6 months, and signatures can only be from ACT residents. So if you live in Queanbeyan, you cannot sign an ACT petition. It's very important, otherwise it will be considered out of order. Once a petition is presented to the Assembly, one of three things can happen. So the member can speak about the petitions. Members can speak about the petition's request. It can get sent to the relevant minister, which requires a response, which can happen within 3 months, I believe, or has to happen within 3 months. And if a petition receives over 500 signatures, it will automatically get sent to a committee. Much like the legislation process, it doesn't mean an inquiry will happen. It just gets brought to their attention, and they can choose whether they would like to undertake an inquiry or not. In terms of paper petitions, there are a few requirements. Sorry, these are all in very strange orders. We'll start with the top one. The most important thing is that there is a template available online. Please use that one. It basically eliminates a lot of, if you are going to use a paper petition, we would recommend e-petitions, but it will give you the exact kind of wording that you need. It requires a brief outline, a clear statement. There has to be numbered detail blocks. The petitions request has to be on every single page. And every block has to be numbered. There has to be signatures on every single page. So there's quite a few things for it to be considered in order. If a petition is out of order, which means it doesn't follow the rules required, it can still be presented in the assembly, but by leave. So basically, a member go, I know this is not following the right rules, but I just want to bring attention to this petition. So it can still be introduced. However, it's much better to have your petition in order because it gives you a better chance of having it get presented. Digital petitions are by far the Assembly's preferred method. They are available on the Assembly website and they can be signed digitally. It eliminates a lot of the formatting requirements because it's already done for you, and it gets checked by the Assembly petitions team as well, but that's a separate point. And you're just required to fill out the information online. Highly recommend, if there are petitions, to go with the digital petition method. I will send Leanne, if you would like, these parts of the website. So it's got all the information. We've got fact sheets on how to use different how to present different petitions, what you need, but definitely stick with the e-petition one. General rules across both, whether it's paper or digital. There are two big ones. Again, these have been pulled out from the standing orders. It's 83 to 100. Sorry, those are the standing order rules that cover petitions. The first is that the petitions request must be respectful and has to be within the Assembly's power. The Assembly operates on two levels of government. So across the country, we have three levels. Every state and territory but the ACT has the federal system that looks after immigration, taxes, things like that. You've got your states and territories, hospitals, schools, public transport, jails, things like that. And then you've got local governments, which look after pet registration, rubbish and recycling, swimming pools, libraries. The Legislative Assembly combines the function of the territory and the local level. So it has to be within what the Assembly can do. So you couldn't necessarily get a petition to change the federal taxing system or marriage laws or perhaps things like that, things that don't sit within what they can do. The second thing is, I mentioned it earlier, but it is really important. Only people who have residential home addresses in the ACT can sign a petition. So if someone signs it, they will check every signature, they'll go through every single page. And they have an address in Queanbeyan or Bungendore or somewhere around Bateman, it will be considered out of order. So that's also really important. In terms of collecting and submitting, so we've put that through. Again, probably hammer that, but ACT details must be legible, and paper petitions must be submitted to the Assembly physically. If you do an e-petition, the petitions team will print it off and they'll have a physical copy. So there has to be a physical copy of all petitions. That process kind of gets taken care of for you if you do the e-petition. You can't scan it. You have to come and physically bring in the petition in paper. It has to be a paper form. So that's another thing that's really important with these. There's a few little quirks. It's another little quirk of the paper petition. Are there any questions on petitions? And the last thing that all petitions are archived at the end of each assembly, so everything gets kept much with everything. Oh, that's a really good question. Fantastic question. Let me. I'll check. I'll get one of my colleagues, Nick, is currently in this program. I'm going to get her to check with our Nerdburger 5000J, who is all across petitions, and I'll get she'll pop in the response to that question. That's a really good question, Heather. Thank you for bringing that up. I will double check and get that to you. So I'll get Jay to pop that answer in. While we're waiting for that to come through, oh, sorry, are there any other questions as well? Just getting some, we're going straight up to the big bosses. Our boss, is his first day back today. So just really like, I know you missed us, David. Let's ask you all these questions now. Alrighty, let's go have a look at committees and then we'll get into that. Alrighty, committee inquiries, really important part of keeping the government accountable, but also fantastic way for people to get involved. You don't have to live in the ACT. You can live in others in New South Wales. You don't have to be over 18. So it's a great way for a whole bunch of different people to get involved as well. So there's less restrictions in that way. Committee inquiries, committees basically undertake a lot of work that the Assembly doesn't have time to. So when the Assembly meets to discuss legislation or motions or any kind of debate, ministerial statements, things like that, they meet 13 weeks of the year, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's not a lot of time to undertake research and kind of go through a whole bunch of different things. So one of committee's primary function is to undertake that research to help provide information that might not necessarily be able to be done within the limited time in the chamber. They help add, so they'll often call on public input. It helps add to the committee knowledge, help them make recommendations, and also help consider different views. Anyone who interacts or provides information to a committee, this is called a submission, and that person is called a witness. So different terms, different meanings in court context, whatever. But if you were to, any one of you were to provide something and be asked to speak in front of them, would be a witness. There are a few tips in providing a committee submission, providing submission to the committee. Longer is not necessarily better with committees, so you want to keep stuff pretty concise. Use plain language. Your submission should tell them what you like, dislike, what you would change about the inquiry topic. The thing to really focus on is to have a look at the terms of reference. So every committee will have basically the scope of the inquiry. There you go. Okay, thank you so much, team. So I hope that answers your question. So that was about the what if you're a homeless person, you would like to sign a petition. Best to sign a petition of the street address of where they're spending the most of their time, Civic Square. So you just put something like that down. I hope that answers your question. So yes, when writing a submission, have a look at the terms of reference. Often the committee will narrow down into a specific part of what they're looking into. So when they were getting submissions for the voluntary assisted dying bill, they weren't looking at that point, general thoughts about it. They had really narrowed down to how that actually is going to be rolled out, what that looks like in practice. So have a look at what those terms of reference, that'll help guide what you're writing. That is on the first tab of a lot of the inquiry, variation inquiry pages. Include your phone number, your name, your email address. We don't accept anonymous submissions, so it's important that you have your information there as well. You can do it handwritten or online. It's often quite time consuming for our committee staff who work across multiple committees, so I would encourage you to do digital submissions. Our team work across multiple committees supporting many members, so it definitely helps them out a lot. I have seen a lot of the ATCOS ones, they do seem to be submitted online. So great job, team. Makes a huge difference, but you can provide something written. Any sources that you have and any references, and you can also let us know if you'd like to talk to the committee. On every page, there is the committee email address, so you contact them and send through that, and they will also reply back to you to let you know that they have received your submission, and they'll check whether they can accept it or not. So offensive stuff may not be accepted. Anything that's accepted will be made public on the website. Your name will be published, but not any contact details. If you would like your name, if you'd like your name to be confidential withheld, you can have a chat to the committee secretary. There are processes for that, but I can't give too much more information on that. It really depends on what it is that's being discussed, and it's kind of up to them to discuss that with you to see whether that's appropriate. So in terms of the process, the committee will say, hey, we're doing an inquiry in this thing. This is what you do to write into the committee. Let's say the committee go, we'd like to come and speak to you. That's part of the research stage. Come in, let's have a chat. That's what hearings are called, basically. So they're public meetings for the committee to find out more information. Anyone who has written can be invited to come and speak to the committee. They don't necessarily invite everyone. They might receive like 200 submissions, for example, and speak to 20 people on an issue. Giving evidence in hearings has the same weight and importance as written submissions as well. The committee, in terms of like what you should do before, reread your submission, because they will be asking you questions about it. So make sure that you're aware of what was included. Have a chat about who will talk. So if you're going with a few people from your organisation, select who will do the primary talking. You can all jump in at different points of different things, but there'll be someone who will be required to give the kind of introductory statement, but really decide who's going to kind of take charge on that. If there are any documents, you can send them beforehand to the committee. If you require any special arrangements, if you need an interpreter or a hearing loop, please ask for that as well. That's fine. It is absolutely our job to make that accessible for everyone. So let us know. Have a think about what you'd like to say to the committee. So prepare some things. You can take some talking notes with you. And I know this is simple, but plan your trip. The city is not the best place to park at times. So have a think about what time, how you're going to get here, just to take some of that stress out. Most of the hearings are public, so there will be live broadcasts. People can come and watch. If there's any sensitive information that you want to share, you can ask the committee to chat to them in private. Again, this is on a case-by-case basis, and they will discuss that with you, whether that they're able to do that. You are also protected by parliamentary privilege when you discuss when you provide evidence at a public hearing. Now, at the hearing, you've arrived, you've got all your stuff, you've got all your documents, you've decided who's going to talk. When you arrive, you'll come through security. They will take you through to this little like holding space. It's a little kind of seated area next to the committee rooms. We've got two. You'll most likely be in the larger one, which is called the Prince Edward Island room. So you'll have a seat there. They'll bring you into the room. The committee will be on one side of the table, all the witnesses. So if there's a few of you, you'll be sitting opposite. There could be people in the public gallery watching, and there's a big black glass window at the back, which has our broadcasting team who record and monitor the sound and the video. When your time arrives, the committee will ask you to sit across from them directly, and you'll be asked to read and make sure that you understand the privilege statement. They'll then ask you to state your names and your opening statement. This is a short statement which kind of summarises what you're here to talk to the committee about. Then the questions will start, basically, and they'll kind of take it in turns asking you things. If you don't know, you can ask to provide that later. At the end, if there's no more questions or if the time has run out, the committee will thank you for your time, and they'll ask you to take a seat. You can choose to sit down or you can leave at this point. Everything is in the assembly and at the committee. There is a Hansard transcript provided for that. So that is all accessible later. And it'll be published on the Assembly website. So we do have a case study for this. This is one that we provided earlier. It's one of the examples actually from ArtCost. It's a pretty good case study to look into because it's quite clear. I feel like it highlights a lot of these points quite well. So this is an inquiry into the employment of people with disabilities. So as I mentioned, I know that you guys have been involved with quite a lot, but this one highlights quite a few things. All right, so our first step is the referral step. So at this point, this was a self-referral. So the committee themselves decided they wanted to inquire into this issue. This was on March the 1st in 2017 and notified the Assembly on the 21st of March. The second step, which is the terms of reference, so laying out the scope, kind of the terms and conditions of what they want. And the three areas that we're looking at was, I'm just going to read them off so I don't make any mistakes there. We've got the implementation of the ACT Public Service Disability Employment Strategy, effectiveness of current attraction and retention programs in the ACT public service, and data collection, monitoring and reporting mechanisms. So that's what they were asking people about. Our third step was the research step. So that includes receiving the public submissions, and then once they've done that, then holding the hearings. They received 19 submissions and they held 2 public hearings in May. So we've started in March. We now have our hearings in May. We don't have committee hearings when the assembly is in the sitting period. So it provides a bit of a difficulty there. They don't run concurrently, obviously, because we have members across both. The Assembly's library team also helps provide information to the committee system through research on this topic. So they also collect information from other areas. Through the hearings and through the submissions, there was quite a few recommendations put forward. There was a few that got put forward by ACCOS that were reported on, so were included in the report, which was paid internships within the ACT for people with disabilities. The ACT should maintain specific disability employment strategy and create identified positions for people at APS level 1 to 4, which can be gateways to people in the public service with a range of disabilities. The committee secretary, who was someone who works in the committee system, like myself, again, statutory office holder, not a member of parliament, they help to put together the report. So then go to the writing stage. A draft report is circulated. The chair, who's one of the members, look at it. If members don't agree, they can provide a dissenting report saying we just disagree with points A, B, whatever it might be. And then in August, the committee chair at this point, it was Mr. Steele, who's currently a minister, but at the time, it's important to note that committees don't have ministers because you don't want people in the government inquiring into themselves, in the executive inquiring into themselves. That's not kind of the function of it. So the committee chair presented it to the Assembly. Once it's presented, the government has 4 months for it to respond to any committee inquiry and basically say, this is what we're going to do on these things. It can be noted, the government's already acted on this. We can't do anything about that. So that's what we're looking at. So that's what the reporting stage is, presenting it to the Assembly. We then have our final step, which is a response. So the government responded on the 30th of November. So this is almost taken full calendar year. The response detailed their position, as I said, on every recommendation. And they've acted on some of these recommendations which were put forward. So they've looked at and implemented the internship program, ACT government standalone disability employment strategy, and identifying certain positions which would be suitable for people of a range of disabilities. So this is a really good example of an inquiry because it highlights a few different things. A, how you can get how different community groups, how different people can get involved. B, how that actually results in change in policy, in legislation, other things that happen across the community, and also the Assembly's function. So often, you're thinking about Parliament, you think about people yelling and question time and arguing, but committees are made up of all different political parties. They're actually required by the standing orders to reflect all different members. So we have government, opposition, and crossbench members on every committee. Their job is to put aside any biases and to work together to try and provide the best information they can, best research, and put that forward to the government for a response. So in conclusion there, we've had a bit of a chat about the Legislative Assembly, the history, a bit of the structure, roles and functions. We had a look at lawmaking, so the 7 steps to making a law, and a brief chat about petitions and requirements of that. Please do an e-petition, committees, and an example of how that works. Now we've got, I know that some of you probably have to duck off now, but there is some time for Q&A, so I'm happy to plot that now. There is also, I'll get to this slide next, there is a survey by your team. If you could fill that out, that'd be fabulous to let us know what you thought of this session. Thank you for putting the link in, that's amazing. And Leanne, I'll just take myself off screen, put myself in the corner there. This is on behalf of Leanne, so I'll get you to speak on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So, thanks for putting up that QR code for the evaluation. So, anyone online, please go fill out that evaluation. It will just help us, I guess, adjust the info sessions as required. Yeah. So, thanks for providing us with that information, Lara. Hopefully, everyone online has learned a bit more about the ACT Legislative Assembly. So the slides and the link to the YouTube video will be sent out within a week, usually after the information session. I recommend that anyone online also has a look at our other training and events. So just coming up in April, we have the Artificial Intelligence Policy Workshop where you can develop a AI policy for your organization. And we also have another information session on the Sector Sustainability Program Knowledge Hub. So those are just available on our website for anyone that's interested. Yeah, that's all from me. Does anyone have any questions? No, it looks like you've done a great job and no questions.
If anything comes through, I'm happy if they send you questions or emails. We've got a wealth of knowledge in the organisation, so I'm happy to send that through as well.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day,
day.
team. See you later.
Bye.